Good morning and thank you for joining me and VP Cheap on this brief review of Steven Spielberg's Presents InnerSPACE, a novel by Nathan Elliott based on the screenplay by Jeffrey Boehm and Chip Proser, now a major film. So, see, Steven Spielberg, of course, was that iconic director who gave us so much in the 70s and the 80s of adventure and science fiction films. There was a point there where having Steven Spielberg written on anything was pretty much a license to print money, and that's about the same era when you had these tiny little books that were put out as accompaniments to the films that were coming out. So this is basically, you could think of as an advertising tactic on the same bar as posters that are put up around the sale of the DVD at your local Blockbuster store, if anyone even remembers those. I think one still exists in Brisbane. Now, Nathan Elliott is in fact one of the many pseudonyms that was used by Christopher Evans. Christopher Evans used several pseudonyms and wasn't actually a bad writer. I especially remember The Golden Eyes of Capella. I don't own any books by him anymore, but I remember The Golden Eyes being a really good book, and I think I read some of his other ones. I don't blame him for 1 second for using a pseudonym for this little stinker. It was a palate cleanser between more serious books, and oh my god, it is bad. It is terrible. The InnerSPACE as a movie itself was basically a complete and utter rip-off of Fantastic Journey from 1966, where all these submarine crew is shrunk to microscopic size and injected into the body of an injured scientist to repair him. I remember that movie very fondly. I wasn't hugely keen on black and whites when I was young, and I think that was a black and white. But they ended up extracting themselves from the body. They were on a timed, scheduled size increase, and they had to actually exit through the tear ducts of the person they'd been injected into. I think it was a fantastic, fantastic voyage. InnerSPACE I did see. I think it came out in the late 80s when I was watching a lot of movies, and I saw it. I don't remember being impressed by it. For a start, it's not directed, as far as I understand, by Steven Spielberg. I think it was directed by Joe Dante. Yeah. And Spielberg's name is basically on the cover because they wanted to sell more books and they wanted more people to go see the movie, which was pretty terrible. For a start, they tried to do too much comedy in it, and that carried over to the book. This book, I suspect, is a word-for-word interpretation of the screenplay written by Jeffrey Boehm and Chip Proser. The book itself is so terrible I don't even care to look at the screenplay. It's comedic. We've got this guy, Tuck Pendleton. He was a pilot, and right at the beginning he's established as a drunk, and he's been chucked out of Air Force, Navy, whatever he was in. Who cares? He isn't a well-rounded character. He's a silly character. A silly and annoying character, even. Say hello, Reapy Cheap. Chirp. Chirp. You can't really empathize with Tuck because there's nothing there to empathize with. He is beyond flat. He is little more than a stereotype. No, he's never more than a stereotype. And he is about as rounded as this piece of paper. Is just tedious. Anyway, he gets shrunk as part of a secret scientific investigation that's being done by these complete bozos who don't even bother to lock the lab door. It requires 2 chips, one to shrink him and one to bring him back to size. So he doesn't have an automatic size increase. And then he's all set to be injected into a rabbit when these big bad guys can't break into the lab to steal the tech. And the head scientist, Ozzy, I think his name was. Hail Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy, I think that's the only reason I even remember his name. He grabs the syringe that contains pink fluid and Tuck in his miniaturized pod. He races out into the mall. He accidentally injects it into some normie guy who works in the Lotus supermarket as a checkout check. Jack, his name is. And then it's all this humour. Tuck needs to establish contact with Jack through the eye and ear inserting, doing something or other. He's meant to have been in a rabbit. He realises he's in a human being. He establishes communication. The bad guys are chasing Jack because they figured out that Tuck and the chip are in the body and they want to get them to sell them to someone in the Middle East. Do I care? No, I don't. This is a 141 page film advertising thingy-majig. It took me days to read because I was so bored by what I was reading even while I was reading it. Poor Christopher Evans. You deserved better, but I'm sure they paid you well, so that's fine. What else to say? It's as well as being flat in the writing style, it's got some major stupidities that I found it hard to look past. So Tuck is this brawling, drunken guy. He's gone into this pod without even his tip flask being filled. He's drying out. He convinces Jack to go to Tuck's apartment and drink some whiskey because Jack doesn't drink. All he's got is some sherry from Christmas or something. And by this time we've heard that Tuck is on a timeline. He was only meant to be in the rabbit for a couple of hours. If he isn't actually extracted using the other chip to grow him up big again by 9 o'clock, he's going to run out of air in his pod and asphyxiate. And he convinces Jack to help him doing some truly idiotic and moronic things by saying, otherwise I'll just be a dead body in a pod floating around in your body. How would you like that? And of course Jack doesn't like that. Who would like thinking about that? And Jack's a hypochondriac. Anyway, so yeah. Anyway, it's very much a Jack coming into his own manly manness, thinking that Tuck is directing him when Tuck really isn't. But the whole thing about the air that I was mentioning earlier that makes it truly ridiculous, someone says, well, why doesn't he just go down into the lungs and pick up some air, reinforce the air in the pod, you know? Oh no, he can't do that. If he opens the pod, he will simply pop. I'm not going to argue with that. There's no physics involved in this. This is not physics. This is imagination. You can have your world any way you want it. If you want the pod to pop, if it opens up to the outside air because of whatever you've imagined, I don't care. But if he can't go down to the lungs and pick up a next bit of extra oxygen when he needs it, he can't get Jack to scull whiskey and then stick a flask out of the pod and bring it back inside and have a drink. One or the other, mate. One or the other, not both. So this is stupid. That's just one major stupidity that sprung to mind right now while I'm talking about it. I didn't write notes while I was reading this because it really didn't deserve that much attention. I do have this rather nice little film tie-in book. I do like these film tie-in books for themselves. It's a dragon, if that means anything. I don't know, does it? And actually my favourite part of this book was the things I found inside. So here we've got Graham's, the easiest place to buy your books, with that pretty little Thoth image next to it. That kind of charmed me. That the Graham's book shop is in Coffs Harbour. So at some stage, I would guess, this was bought new from Coffs Harbour. Quite a long time ago, by the way, I would imagine. I rather feel like this one is copyright 82 and published by Dragon in 1987. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the first time it's been read since then too, looking at the spine. And the other thing in there was to Rolf from Cecilia. Isn't that cute? So sometime back in probably 87 or 88, Cecilia bought this in Coffs Harbour for Rolf. And I don't know that Rolf ever read it, but I did. So thank you, Cecilia. And thank you, Graham's Bookshop, which I don't believe is still there. But next time I go to Coffs Harbour, I will check, because there might be other books there. And you and I we should read good books. Thanks for watching.